Welcome to today's webinar, How to Optimize Tech Hiring and Retention Strategies for Success in an Employee's Market. Thank you to everyone who has joined today. And to those who are joining in the recording after the fact, we are glad all of you are here. You've likely joined today because you, like us, are doing everything that you can to keep up with today's constantly changing tech hiring market. Between the high demand for tech professionals, the shift in how we are collectively viewing work as a result of the pandemic, and organizations of all sizes and types from all industries are pursuing aggressive growth and transformation. Meaning today's tech hiring market is unlike any we've seen before. The power has shifted to the hands of the candidate who now has their choice of where to work next, which means that organizations need to stay on top of what those tech professionals want from their next role. And that's what we're here to talk about today, how you can use the latest data on tech salaries and tech professionals' sentiment about how they work to optimize your hiring and retention strategies for success. I'm Courtney Patterson, content strategist at DICE, and I'm joined today by Amy Butchko, Director of Talent Acquisition at SAIC, and our very own CEO of DICE, Art Zeile. Amy and Art are both experts on career and tech, and they both offer unique perspectives on the shifts that we're seeing in today's competitive tech job market. Before I formally introduce our panelists, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover and some data points from our latest tech salary report that I'd like to share to give a little more context for the questions that we're going to be asking our panelists today. Today's webinar will be recorded. We will be providing a recording of the webinar that you'll receive via email tomorrow afternoon, about 24 hours after the webinar ends today. All attendees are muted, but feel free to drop any comments or questions that you have throughout the webinar in the chat box on your screen. We'll be covering a lot of material today, but we welcome any questions that you have in case we do have time to answer them at the end. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide us with feedback on how we did. We encourage you to take just a moment to let us know what you thought of the content and the presenters. We do read every comment and we use them to improve the webinars that we host here at DICE. So thank you in advance for participating in that survey. And then finally, we've allotted 45 minutes for this webinar today, and we have a great lineup of questions prepared for our two panelists. But just before I introduce those panelists, like I mentioned, I do want to give just a very brief overview of DICE's latest tech salary report, which we released in January. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I highly recommend you check it out. We will include a link to the report in that email that I mentioned just a moment ago that will have the recording of the webinar that you'll receive tomorrow. The data that I'm about to go over is just a taste of what you'll find in the full report. The report is packed with information. So again, if any of this is of any interest, I encourage you to dive into the data that supports it. So DICE releases a tech salary report each year that presents data on salary trends by location, occupation, skills, and levels of experience, as well as insights on which benefits resonate most with technologists right now. This year's report was released on January 19th, and here are just a few of the key takeaways from this year's tech salary report, which, as I mentioned, have prompted many of the questions that we will ask our panelists today. We found that the average tech salary increased 6.9% between 2020 and 2021, and it surpassed $100,000, which was actually a first in the history of the DICE tech salary report. Technologists also expressed the continued importance of traditional benefits like health insurance, paid vacation, but they also expressed growing interest in work from home stipends, child and elder care options, training and education opportunities, which we'll talk about later today. And then finally, the data shows a mixture of growth geographically with some tech hubs that were seen as emerging in recent years, like Atlanta, Chicago, and Seattle, growing significantly year over year from 2020 to 2021 as a result of those resources that they had been pouring into their tech scenes and the technologists' interest in moving to those new markets. So now I would love to introduce our panelists. We will all come on camera here. Great. It's wonderful to see your faces. I will introduce Amy first. Amy is a recruiting leader with experience building teams and designing automation systems to exponentially impact recruitment marketing and talent acquisition outcomes at enterprise scale. Since 2013, she has worked with SAIC to establish core capabilities in talent sourcing, including creating a new talent attraction architecture with SAIC's first recruitment marketing function. She previously held leadership and consulting roles supporting technical talent acquisition delivery in the intelligence community. And when she's not working, she likes to cook, catch up on Netflix, and take pottery classes. And Art is the CEO of DHI Group, the parent company of both Dice and Clearance Jobs. He came on board 4 years ago with the mission of creating the best career marketplaces for technologists in the US. Art was also an officer in the US Air Force, and he served as an astronautical engineer for over 7 years. Upon leaving his service, he has been in the tech industry for his career, starting 3 separate software and IT services businesses, each time using Dice as a client. Art's hobbies center on enjoying the outdoors in Colorado, including skiing, hiking, and tennis. Although it's snowing today in Colorado, so I don't think you'll be playing any tennis.
Not today.
We are so glad to have both of you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yes. So with all of that covered, we can dive into the questions that we have for you today around how you're adapting your hiring and retention strategies to accommodate and leverage the tech salary trends that we just discussed from the tech salary report. The first question that we have today is for both of you. Amy, I'll come to you first for your answer, and then we'll go to you, Art. The first question deals with the increase in tech salaries that we're seeing across the board, across roles, locations, in-demand skills. Our question is, how are you adjusting compensation packages to accommodate these trends?
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thank you again for having me today. This is a topic that consumes a lot of my time with trying to figure out how to attract. And then, of course, we always want to retain. So, that whole journey. But with this particular question, the way that SAIC has chosen to address compensation is that we are constantly evaluating salary surveys, and most big companies do that anyway. So that's really not new. But one of the things that has become different is that we're taking that combination of that historical perspective, because any kind of a salary survey is a look back. It got old, the moment that you printed it, right? And what we have been able to do to augment that is to use some of our real-time data that we're picking up from candidates that are in the market right now. And so we're kind of combining all of that together and, doing our best to set fair wages and to attract and retain the right talent. Our compensation and benefits function works harder than they ever have, and we have been partnered with them more closely than we ever have because, as recruiters, we're on the front line. And, and I've always felt that. I've always certainly had a bias for recruiting with my background. But, now, they're really looking to us as the expert. And now, one of the core competencies of even being a recruiter in a modern technical company is that, we're expected to gather that real-time compensation data. And, you know, and in the past, that information would have been looked at as like anecdotal, like those are very nice anecdotes, Amy. But now it's looked at as indispensable. You know, what are you learning? What are people telling you? How can we get the right information fastest? And, you know, finally, you know, we always appreciate benchmark data. It is rare in this industry to be able to find benchmark data quickly that is up to date in real time. And so kudos to your team, Art, for bringing the survey to life and making it so valuable and keeping up with it. I know it's a big lift, but you know, companies like us, we appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate those thoughts, Amy. And obviously, we believe that the Tech Salary Report is an instrumental tool, and it clearly shows that there is historical high demand for technologists right now. And, you know, Courtney said it right from the beginning. The headline figure is that the average is now over 6 figures for salaries today. And given that demand for tech talent, you're already seeing companies pretty much everywhere adjust their compensation and bump it up in terms of their ranges. Notably, I think it was like 2 weeks ago that Amazon declared that they would bump their maximum base salary from $160,000 to $350,000. And so that really gives you a sense of the competition that's out there for tech talent specifically. And the competition is even greater for those areas that are in high demand with low supply, like machine learning engineers, AI engineers, data science, programming languages like Python and Java. And so from my perspective, the real key for DHI, and I hope for a lot of other organizations, is to avoid getting into a conversation that is solely based on salary. And don't get me wrong, salary is incredibly important. Obviously, what we've seen from our surveys is that it's an important driver for why technologists actually leave their positions. And so one of the first adjustments we did make coming into this environment in 2022 was to expand our compensation ranges for both junior and senior developer bands. I think that was an important adjustment that we made. And we want to reward those candidates that we attract to DHI group based on their experience and the qualities that put them into that range. We've also done a lot to focus on retention. And obviously, everybody knows that it's very expensive to hire new candidates. It's expensive to train them. There's a whole, you know, cost life cycle associated with that. It's a lot easier to retain the folks that you have today. So a lot of our senior leadership time is actually spent talking about how we can better engage our technologists, our entire company, all members of our team. I'm proud of the fact that our, you know, attrition rate so far this year, you know, albeit it's been, you know, 10 weeks or less getting into 2022, is less than 10% on an annualized basis. I'd say another real key step that we made in coming into 2022 is that we actually doubled our merit pay increase pool. And we go through a cycle of talent management where we look at talent each second quarter and have an increase in pay that takes place on the 1st of July. In doubling that pool was a big statement that we recognize that the external environment is a very competitive environment. The other important thing that we did is that we have also changed our bonus structure so that bonuses are paid out on team-based OKRs as opposed to individual-based, you know, goal setting. So we've done a lot of different things this year because it is a very, very competitive environment. So I appreciate the question because it's on the top of mind of virtually all clients that we talk to today.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, this shift in mindset of how professionals across the US are evaluating how work fits into their lives now, rather than kind of the opposite line of thinking, which was the case pre-pandemic. How, Amy, again, I'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Art. How is SAIC taking this into account with both retaining and attracting new tech talent? Based on those recent shifts and kind of what benefits and perks tech candidates are placing the most importance on, have you made any changes to how you're going about enhancing that employee experience? Kind of what Art was talking about with retention. Have you changed anything there?
Yes, but I think you probably want more information, right?
Yes.
So yes. So yes is the short answer. The much longer answer is I think that, you know, when I attend these kinds of talks, I like to leave with something really actionable. And so in this case, there's two things that I would say are of key importance, you know, particularly from where I sit on the front end of the talent acquisition process as, you know, essentially as a recruiting leader. And the first thing I would say is focus on your attraction mechanism. Make it easy for candidates to apply. And that enhanced candidate experience can kind of foreshadow a great employee experience. And so one of the things that we've done over the last few years is to figure out how to get our apply process to be really short, and, you know, to where somebody can finish an application in 5 minutes, which is, you know, now becoming kind of table stakes. And so that's an important takeaway. If your application takes longer than that, you know, you're probably going to want to take a look at it. So that's the first thing I would say, just from the front end of just how you can begin to, like, you know, because it's two parts, right? You're trying to kind of increase the aperture of the funnel, and then you're trying to figure out what to do with folks once they get into your funnel. And, you know, and some people have talked about it as a flywheel, or, you know, once they get into your process, what happens? So secondly, and I think that this is really where SAIC has been differentiated, and that is that we are looking at leadership as a key driver for retention. And one of the things that I would also refer the audience to is ADP's most recent HR experience report. And in that, the discoveries were that 51% of what retains an employee is what happens with their leader and with their team. You know, so very much to, you know, what Art is talking about with, you know, developing OKRs around the idea that it is the team that matters, right? And, you know, but that only, you know, but if you take that percentage as 51, that other 49% is the stuff that happens with HR. And so from that perspective, you know, I would point you to Michelle O'Hara, our CHRO, has a couple of articles out in the universe, in some more HR oriented circles, not so much in recruiting, but in those HR circles where she talks about, and I can kind of detail a little bit about using ongoing feedback channels like employee surveys to get sentiment from employees, you know, really giving our employee resource groups attention, along with figuring out how to upskill leaders. Because what we believe is that flexibility should be personalized, and that's really where leaders and managers can be vital, because the approach kind of recognizes that how and where people work will impact their well-being and their willingness to continue as an employee, and, you know, hopefully their desire. And, you know, that is one of the things that we've really kind of made central to the SAIC approach during this time. So hopefully that gives some folks some actionable things that are good takeaways for their organizations.
So following on Amy's comments, I do believe that compensation still is one of the most important considerations for candidates that's out there. There's no question about it. The surveys come back that we do time and time again saying that that's the case. And you know that in the month of January, at least, CompTIA announced that the unemployment rate for the tech sector was roughly 1.7%. So folks know that they have leverage in terms of compensation. But I think that they're also interested in the full span of what it means to work at that company, what the environment is like. They would like to have a much more flexible schedule. We also see that in the data that's coming back from technologists' sentiment surveys, the importance of hybrid and remote work. I can tell you that prior to the pandemic, in terms of DICE and its job postings, roughly about 3% were remote qualified prior to the pandemic. As of last week, that number jumped to 36%. So more than a third of our job postings are remote qualified. So I think that's one of the biggest conversation pieces that people are having right now with the candidates that they're trying to attract, and for that matter, to retain inside of their organizations. Sometimes that's easy to do if you're in an organization, sometimes that's hard to do. In our case, we allow for our team members to work from home full-time or to work in the office any one of the 3 days of the week that we actually maintain our office, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But I think it speaks to the fact that there is this notion of how people are adjusting the way that they bring, your question, their lives into their work, as opposed to the alternative, their work into their lives. So ultimately, we have made a number of different adjustments. One of them being how we reimagine the notion of vacation time, because everything is blending together. In the traditional sense, vacation time was very transactional. It was an idea of getting away from your job and the connotation that you're, ultimately going to be completely shut off. And I don't think that that's necessarily relevant anymore, and it's not in line with what most people are talking about for mental health and wellness overall. So in practice, what we've done is that we've created a truly flexible annual leave policy. A lot of people call that unlimited vacation, although in an HR context, I'm told I'm not supposed to say that because that's has negative connotations. We also have early out Fridays, which is kind of it feels like it's an Eastern Coast principle, but we brought that to our company, which has offices in Denver, Des Moines, as well as New York City. We've also given folks specific mental health days. In fact, we had one last Friday where we just took the entire day off and allowed people to enjoy themselves, have a longer weekend. And so in addition to that, I think that we have also shifted our consideration for healthcare in general, because that's top of mind for most people. So we've absorbed all the costs associated with increases in the expense of our healthcare program last year and added fertility benefits, because that's becoming part of the conversation, especially with the earlier, the younger generations of our team members. So a lot of different things that we've done to adjust to this notion that there's a blend between work and life, and people want the flexibility of working from home, the flexibility to essentially have a home office and to change their work hours. Kind of comes back to what Amy said with regard to personalizing the experience of the individuals within your team and respecting the fact that they have differences. I think the other really important consideration, which is really important societally wise and also very much top of mind for us at DHI Group, is a commitment to driving the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so a big part of what we did over the pandemic is we made sure that people understood our commitment to DEI. We have trained our managers with a suite of different courses. We've trained and started the training process for our entire team. We've introduced employee resource groups. So I think that is another really super important part of what it takes to attract and retain talent in today's environment. They want to know that there is a commitment to their personal lives, the personalization of their experience at the company, but they also want to know that the company itself cares about DEI issues. So I just bring that to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into all of that. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, foot stomp it a little. Those are all, very excellent points, Art. And I think that, actually Courtney and I were just talking on, as we were kind of preparing for this about, because SAIC does a 4-day work week if you want it for some roles. And we were, but at the same time, one of the first people that ever said to me, I don't really want to do a 4-day work week because I can't squeeze that much work into one day because I have little kids. And and so it's really, and that's where the whole leadership thing becomes so important, and and being willing to have those conversations and do it in a way that's really open and transparent. And I love to hear that you all are doing that. And it's I've been virtual since before it was cool. So, it's great to hear that, so much, there's so much progress there, but that's, I just wanted to foot stomp that, Courtney.
Oh, that's perfect. I appreciate it. Switching gears just a little bit to specifically skills. So in the tech salary report, we look at salary data and the trends by skill, specifically programming skills, but also just generally tech skills. And as we know, this list of skills is constantly growing, and it's very difficult to keep up with. And in addition to being difficult to keep up with, the pace at which that list is growing, we can't gather the data quickly enough in real time to really act on it. So, and of course, as we would expect, technologists who are up on the newest tech skills are going to be in highest demand, and they can, command the highest value, and they do. So I'm curious, Amy, how does SAIC stay on top of those compensation changes for these like really new, emerging, in-demand skills?
Well, I don't have a one-word answer for you on this one. So I affirm that the challenge really is figuring out, as these disciplines evolve and as new tools are developed and as they become standardized and adopted within business, obviously then the people to kind of keep the lights on becomes really important. And so what we have done, I think that probably the easiest way to put it is just to say that, we as a sourcing organization, a talent sourcing organization is really where a lot of this happens on the recruiting side of the house, is we try to follow the market and learn what those technologies are. And so what that ends up being in practice is that, a few years ago, you could have IT is a department. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, like you're going to have to be more specific now. And so we are really learning more about like what goes into IT or software. And, and so what that might mean, and, an example in our business is, taking a newer discipline like DevSecOps and taking that and putting it into its own job category. And so for big enterprises, this is a huge undertaking. And this is kind of what I mean by, being in partnership with your compensation team, but also kind of having those, this is really where having technical recruiters is also helpful, because they can really also begin to speak that language, and you're not just a buzzword person, like where you're just and you're looking for the buzzwords and resumes, but you're also being able to sort of even like predict what someone might have been doing 5 years ago, that maybe that they're doing something today that is different, and you might reach out to that person, have a conversation, and you're now talking about the newest, latest thing. So that's kind of one of the ways that we do it, and and so from that perspective, it involves having a well-trained educated sourcing and recruiting function that are literate and know where to go get literate about, and having the tools to go get literate. Thank you, DICE, for some of those. And when in looking at your survey this time, the way you've got it broken out, I mean, of course, you probably finished it, patted yourself on the back, realized there was a new skill that wasn't there, and then we'll do it again next year. But that's kind of some of the stuff that we're doing to stay current and fresh and make the compensation commensurate.
Fantastic. Well, so I would like to add a couple of thoughts there. The first is there's no question that the pace of change in the technology industry is super high. I always say that the half-life of any particular technology skill is roughly about 5 years. I joke that when I came out of the Air Force, I worked for a boutique software company in the Silicon Valley. This is in the 1990s, and I was a Fortran programmer. And you will not find any Fortran programming job opportunities on DICE today. I'm pretty sure of that. So again, these skills are rapidly changing. It's really super important to understand the compensation dimension for certain hot skills. They do differ. The three that I'd like to talk to, because I think that they talk about the changes that are happening real time in the industry, are number one, Lambda, number two, machine learning, and number three, cloud computing, or cloud engineering. So going back to Lambda, Lambda is a technology that's part of the Amazon Web Services service catalog. It's an example of what's called serverless computing. So the idea there is you're paying for the execution of a piece of code instead of the server that it would regularly reside on. And I think it's an evolution of what's happening inside of the industry, at least for those companies that are cutting edge. We use Lambda at DICE and for clearance jobs. And so the idea is you don't pay for a server, again, you pay for code. And folks that have this really cutting edge skill are in super high demand because it's right at the forefront. The second skill area is machine learning, and people have probably heard about machine learning. It's essentially training equations to get better by themselves as they calculate very large data sets and they naturally consume information. So just about every organization is involved or has some kind of a ML project, machine learning project. It's generically categorized as artificial intelligence. There was a study that was done by MC Burning Glass that said that nearly a quarter of all postings in the tech domain over the last year had a requirement for machine learning. So again, that's a super hot skill, one that everybody should understand, that if you're looking for somebody in that domain, there's a limited supply and there's plenty of demand. The last area, which is cloud engineering, is associated with all the cloud platforms that are out there, notably Amazon Web Services, which I think is much further evolved than Azure or Google or Oracle or the number of other platforms that are out there. So there's a high demand for AWS engineers in particular, but many companies are now experimenting, and by necessity, just based on business continuity considerations, with multiple clouds. So finding somebody that knows how to use AWS and Google and Azure simultaneously, again, a small set of people have those kind of skills. They're in super high demand, and so you have to compensate them appropriately to get them attracted to your opportunity. Again, it's a really interesting environment where the skills are changing very fast, and it pays to stay on top of what that means from a supply and demand perspective in the marketplace.
Absolutely. Art, you have kind of a wider scope industry-wise. We've been talking a lot about the government contract space, which is very interesting and very intricate and complex. If we kind of scale back a little bit or go up a little bit higher, Art, this question will be specifically for you from the DICE perspective. With the jobs that are posted on DICE and the job candidates who are applying for these jobs, are you seeing similar trends across the industries that we've been talking about when it comes to hiring and retention across all industries, some specific industries? How does that look?
Yes, we're seeing the same basic trends in terms of the importance of compensation. But what I would say is interesting from my perspective is that there are industries that have a more difficult time finding technology candidates. Obviously, the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world, they know how to do that because that's the heart of their business. It's much more difficult if you're a finance organization, if you're a healthcare organization, if you are in a manufacturing capacity. And what we've found is that for those companies, and largely all companies should be doing this, but for those companies, they really have to put a fine, I would say, emphasis on their value proposition, and specifically with corporate branding. They need to explain the nature of their culture, their values, their mission, their stance on social issues. Those things become not nice to haves, but need to haves to attract and retain, for that matter, these technologist candidates that have a lot of options and opportunities in general. And so that is super important, I think, now and into the future, is combining these things that we've talked about during the course of this webinar: compensation, benefits, the notion of work from home and how important a hybrid work environment is, with the notion that you're working in a place that you want to work, because you respect the culture, you respect the people, you respect the teamwork. And people also want, what we found is to get their individual questions answered. And so you really have to have a means, a mechanism, a communication tool. On DICE, we have private email and we have a text-based messaging system. People want to know the answers to these questions. So that's becoming much more important. I'd say that's an important trend across all these disparate industries, is the notion of getting your corporate branding and your value proposition properly in front of the candidates.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned the future, and that kind of segues into this next question for both you and Amy. I know we're only in the third month of this new year, but in thinking about 2023 and beyond, do you expect the tech demand to continue to rise? I think we're both all on the same page here, but I'm curious why you think that.
A why question. Wow. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I think the easiest way for me to say this, I'm actually going to dovetail a little bit with some of what Art said, but so SAIC is a technology company, and we seek to create a culture of innovation that enables us to serve the mission and to serve our customers effectively. So that is top of mind at all times. So, the kinds of folks that we attract are really interested in the mission, and they are, amazing technologists all at the same time. And, every nook and cranny of SAIC touches technology, including my job, which used to be done on paper with faxes. Right? So, but with that in mind, I can't help but give a nod to Moore's Law, which actually says that you can expect the speed of and capability of computers to increase every 2 years. So so my speed, my timer is moving even faster. So I think that, what that means for business is that we now live in a world where we are reinventing, or we're automating something all the time. And by themselves, those little changes don't mean anything. But in a year or two, we find our whole job is transformed. And poof, here we are, right? So we're now using an entirely new set of digital tools. I don't know, maybe one day we'll call it like Butchko's Law or something like that. But in seriousness, the pace of innovation essentially means that all companies are tech companies, and or they're quickly headed that way. And just because you don't necessarily know that you're using AI or you're using ML, you might be. And it behooves all of us to understand that those little tiny iterations along the way make a big difference when you if you woke up in your job 2 years from now, you might find yourself in a different place. So you have to kind of stay apprised, stay awake, and so I think the short answer there is that the demand for folks who are going to keep the lights on in technology is not going away. And those of us who are in this business are going to find ourselves looking for new people a lot. So that's my prediction.
So I'll follow that by saying that I've been in technology my entire career. Obviously, in the sense of DHI Group, we study statistics associated with growth trends continuously. I can tell you that one of the things that I did coming on board the company about 4 years ago is I looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics review of technology positions going back to the year 2000, just to understand the trend line. And the trend line is definitely up and to the right. What was surprising to me was that if you looked at the years of 2001, which was kind of like the dot-com implosion, as well as the Great Recession in 2008, the technologist trend line, the number of positions in the United States actually just grew straight through those periods of time. We have had this ever increasing progression of need for technologists. I view the pandemic as accelerating that. In fact, some studies say that we've accelerated this path towards digitization of business models by 7 years in 1 year of the pandemic. and people realize that they need to have more of an online presence and more of a ability to support their people at home. There's also a really interesting study that was done by Microsoft in the year 2020. They predicted that the worldwide number of digital workers would grow from 40 million to 190 million by the year 2025. So in a 5-year span, moving from 40 million digital workers across the globe, this is outside of the United States, it includes the United States, but also all countries, to 190 million. So there's a lot of predictions of growth that are out there. And I can tell you that in the year 2019, before the pandemic struck us, there were 1 million unfulfilled positions in the United States. Like, we literally did not have the supply to meet the demand of businesses. That's what I consider to be the bigger issue, is that in any particular year, we graduate about 84,000 comp sci majors, and that's obviously just one sliver of the full spectrum of what constitutes the tech industry. But we used to fill in those positions with H-1B visas. The Trump administration reduced them. The Biden administration hasn't really done anything to change that. But I would say the predictions are very much in favor of two real big occupational trends in the United States, transforming the landscape, those being an ever-increasing number of technologists and an ever-increasing number of healthcare workers. And that's, again, based on our studies behind the scenes, trying to understand the trends and being in front of those trends. Another interesting thing you pointed out earlier, I think there is a really interesting notion of a flight from tech talent living on the coastal areas to other interesting places in the United States, like Austin and Dallas and Denver and Pittsburgh and Atlanta, Phoenix. All those places are becoming much more relevant for capturing tech talent. Now, like I said, about a third can be remote wherever they want to be, but that's also an important trend I think that everybody needs to attend to, and what it means for their business. But again, I just reflect that there is an ever growing number or need for technologists that has been in the past. It's predicted for the future. And I think it's really important to know where they want to live.
Yeah, definitely. There was a Wall Street Journal article that was fed to me. I always have to say it was fed because I don't know that I actually selected in, but the article the headline was something to the effect of if every single person who abandoned the workforce during COVID for any reason came back, we would still not have enough workers. And, in tech, I think we know that we were already in a little bit of a deficit. So, it's sobering when you really think about, how and where, maybe that'll be the next webinar, how and where are we going to find the people to keep the lights on in the tech sector. So, but,
that's
we're certainly doing our part over here. Yeah, I'm here for you, Art. I'm here for you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's so great to hear that certainly it's not going to slow down, neither in the GovCon space or just broader in the tech industry broadly. So thank you both for those data points and those resources. That's really interesting. As we are quickly approaching the end of our scheduled 45 minutes, I just want to thank you both for taking time out of your day to discuss these trends and answer our questions about how they're impacting the tech hiring landscape and how you're adjusting your strategies. I also want to thank everyone who's attended today, anyone watching on demand after the fact. We hope that you have found the discussion really helpful, and like Amy mentioned, we hope that you have found some actionable tips in here. We'll be sending the recording of this webinar tomorrow afternoon. Feel free to share it with any colleagues or friends, family, anyone who might be interested or would find this beneficial to the work that they do. You'll receive that email around 24 hours from about now, so tomorrow afternoon. And just a friendly reminder, when the webinar does end, you will see a survey pop up. And we really appreciate any thoughts that you would like to share. We truly use all of the comments to help make these webinars better. So any ideas you can share, we greatly appreciate it. Again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining today. Amy and Art, you have been wonderful. And we hope that everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Thanks,
afternoon.
Amy.